Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone who's tuned into this podcast. And today we're going to be talking about IBM Software Asset Management. And I'm delighted that I've got Bruce Connolly with me. Bruce is a leading expert, if not the leading expert in Australia around IBM licensing, specifically in regards to how usage and installation data is collected to calculate IBM license compliance positions. So quickly over to Bruce. People know me because I've done podcasts before, but if you could give a quick introduction, Bruce, and then we'll get straight into our discussion.
Yes, I spent almost 35 years with IBM, and so therefore, and in not IBM Global Services. A lot of people say I'm with IBM, but they essentially are not with a mother company and they don't actually deal with software. I was the second employee in Australia in the software brand or whatever. So I've had, a very long experience of the journey from IBM, from mainframe computers where software was essentially embedded and you didn't pay for it, to monthly license charge as the banks have, to software asset management as we have today, of essentially what IBM calls distributed or one-time charge software. And when with IBM, I started to read the very first reports from the IBM ILMT tools and manually tools which were very primitive in those days, and have stayed with that for the next decade and a half. Today, where we read virtually all the IBM metrics, whether they be coming from ServiceNow, ILMT, or from Kubernetes in the cloud.
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction, Bruce, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty straight away. So when people talk about IBM Software Asset Management, Bruce, I always think, of a jumble of like tools and integrations that are actually needed. And it'd be great if, from your own perspective, you mentioned you had like 30 plus years experience with IBM licensing, how we actually set up an infrastructure to actually discover IBM software license installs. And maybe if you could give us an introduction to subcapacity licensing and how data is collected for that, and what the IBM approved tool set is to actually do that. So it'd be great if you could just give us your view on that, Bruce.
So we always begin, as we do with Microsoft and Oracle actually, by looking at the bill of materials, or in IBM's case, the Passport Advantage agreement. So there will be a nominated person within the organization that will be able to print out all the software owned or purchased from IBM way back to 1998 through the Passport Advantage agreement. And it's important to note not to accept a software maintenance renewal as being anything like that, because if you bought the software, even if you don't maintain it, and if you bought the software 20 years ago, it doesn't matter. You are still subject to these terms and conditions one way or another. So the first thing to do is have a look at the entire suite and ask yourself, what of this software is actually deployed? Now, when you look at this software, you need to understand that IBM has lots of metrics. In fact, almost 200 of those metrics. And you've got to look at which of those metrics are we actually physically looking for? If the software is licensed by subcapacity, which means it will have a unit of a PVU, a processor value unit, or a VPC, we then look for a report from one of two tools. Is the IBM license metric tool, if it's a traditional VM or a traditional cloud, or the IBM licensing service, ILS, if we are using a containerized environment one way or another. So it's very important to know on day one what metrics we are actually looking for. The other thing to understand is that there are some products whereby even the metric itself is not enough. You actually have to look at the console and the reports, because IBM has many gotchas. What they do is they type terms and conditions into documents that are put on the cloud, which you, as the owner of the product, are completely unaware of either the term and condition or the change in the term and condition. But you're expected to have universal knowledge of this. That term and condition might specify something like, if you put a tick in this box in this product, instead of one user which you bought, you have to pay for every one in the entire company. And there are products in IBM which says you put this tick in the box, particularly it's called an anonymous box, then your license fee can blow up by factors of 1,000. And that has physically happened, and you have to be careful with it. So it's important to look at these products and to understand exactly what is required. Now, Mike, you asked about the IBM license metric tool. Everybody focuses on that tool and has done for the last almost 20 years. But it's actually now one of the causes, minor cause of IBM Software Asset Management, because in the majority of cases, people have actually employed that tool and they do have a report. The problem with the report is it's incorrect or deliberately misleading. The IBM License Metric tool is very simple. It is a small WebSphere application. It is nothing more than a few screens on a browser, and it is actually not difficult to use, as opposed to a tool like Flexera, which is gargantuan by comparison. ILMT is light, small, and fast. But what underpins ILMT is usually an endpoint manager. And the endpoint manager is usually HCL's Big Fix. You don't pay a license to HCL. It comes with the product, because the Big Fix product was part of the IBM suite until about 6 years ago, one way or another. But it is the deployment of Big Fix, its agents, and how it interfaces with your security systems, which is 9/10 of the difficulty in deploying ILMT. And usually, when people are non-compliant, it's because of a failure in Big Fix, not in ILMT itself. Is that a reasonable synopsis?
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. Now, Asset Centre are an approved ServiceNow partner. So what we've been looking at, myself and Bruce, in some depth recently, are opportunities where organisations have invested heavily in the ServiceNow platform, and we're sort of like working to see if organizations want to optimize the platform by adding the ServiceNow SAM and HAM modules. Now, one of the challenges that we have, which we'll talk about later on, is how ServiceNow ingests and collects data for the purposes of license compliance, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I know we've discussed this a number of times, Bruce. Why do you think ServiceNow Discovery, which is the ServiceNow Discovery system that discovers CIs and the software installations and the entity relationships between CIs, why is ServiceNow Discovery so important within the context of IBM licensing, Bruce? What's your view on that?
Well, ServiceNow is step one. Let's consider the issue where a customer thinks they're perfectly compliant because they've put Big Fix and ILMT agents out there on every one of their nodes, and they think they're imperfectly compliant. But an audit comes along, and the audit finds that they've missed one cloud, just one thing in Google Cloud, let's say. Well, maybe they've only licensed 2 cores and they're only paying for 2 cores. IBM will look at that and say, you didn't run the ILMT agent in that. Therefore, what is the maximum number of cores in your service? Well, it might be 128. So so your license fee will increase from 2 cores to 128 cores. So the consequences of making a mistake and missing a VM for an ILMT agent are really, really severe. And so Big Fix only knows something when it's got an agent. So we need an agentless system to be able to go around and detect where we would put those big fix agents. So ServiceNow is a vital tool for us to go around and find which VMs have the IBM software on them, so we know how to deploy those big fix agents. And that's why I regard ServiceNow and tools like it as the most important first step in IBM software compliance.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, Bruce. Now, the other thing that we've encountered in recent times is changes to IBM configurations within the life cycle of that. And I think you've mentioned before that the ability for ServiceNow to track changes and incidents is actually quite important from an auditing perspective. Do you want to share your thoughts on that, Bruce?
Well, if you haven't got ServiceNow or something like it, you've just about loaded the auditor's gun with bullets and shot yourself. You see, the thing is that ILMT, there wouldn't be an ILMT customer in the ones that I've dealt with that isn't going to have the product break. It will break. It's not that the product is faulty. It's because the product relies on essentially TCP/IP ports and communications with VMware's VM Manager or Hyper-V. If any one of those things breaks for one reason or another, you can have an over license situation which isn't real. So an example of this would be that you have some VMs under VMware. You are talking to VMware through its browser-based interface, and IBM rates things at 70 PVUs for that particular application. Suddenly, VMware, somebody changes the password. You're not told. They're not told. They've had some sort of an edict that says you've got to change passwords. But ILMT doesn't know that, and no one changed the ILMT password. Suddenly, after a few days, you're non-compliant because you've gone from 70 PVU to 120 PVU. ILMT has recorded that. You've had an audit and the bill has come immediately. But it isn't real. Your only defense in that situation is ServiceNow, because when you understand that there was a breakage in the connection, you need to record when, why, and how you fixed it, and provide that to the auditor as your proof, one way or another. So ServiceNow's ability to just put it in a ticket, because audits sometimes go back 2 years. And in fact, I've seen one that went back more than 7, one way or another. And the employees have gone since then. The corporate memory has disappeared. But ServiceNow should have that ticket and incident in there. And it'll tell you all about the CI, and you'll be safe.
Okay, thanks for that, Bruce. So in summary, I think this is just really highlighting the importance of having your ITSM processes and ITAM on the same platform. And by having all of your incidents and change data on a platform, it's very easy to actually share that across other modules in the way that Bruce just described. So very important takeaway. The other thing I wanted to just talk about in regards to audits, Bruce, that I was with a customer a couple of weeks ago, and they were asking me, large organization, a lot of legacy infrastructure there. They asked me a question about outdated operating systems, if I've got the right term there, and how ILMT, Big Fix, etc., would actually handle that situation and what the best practice is from an IBM standpoint. So it would be good to get your insight again on that, Bruce. And I'm sure you've encountered this issue a lot of times, because we know there's a lot of organizations out there that are still running old operating systems, primarily to support legacy applications.
Yes, and there are many people, for instance, and often a lot associated with Sun and Solaris and things like that. where they can't really upgrade because the platform is going to go away at some particular point in time. So if the application vendor has disappeared or the thing is stabilized one way or another, you actually can't actually go and change the OS in many cases because it wouldn't be supported one way or another. Now, it's all very well to say that you need to upgrade to get patches and security and all the rest. But if you actually have a look at this, right, if you upgrade the VM manager, for instance, in Solaris to something that's supported, perhaps the guests would be protected by that. Of course, this is a wonderful opportunity for people to write a term and condition into an agreement, which people would not be aware of, that says that you cannot claim full capacity for essentially out-of-date operating systems or operating systems for which IBM has declared that ILMT will no longer support. It's like the gift that keeps giving. What actually happens is that the customer might pay what they believe to be the correct license. The IBM might the day after declare that that operating system is no longer supported. So they might have paid a settlement of millions of dollars and a day after have to pay millions of dollars again. And it might even happen again after that. And I've seen that happen on a number of occasions. So you have to be careful of those things. And one of the things that ServiceNow gives us, even without ILMT, is it's going to give us the operating systems level. And so it's not only a question of detecting where to put the big fix agents, but also whether it's valid to do so.
Right,
Now, ILMT itself, IBM specifies at its default agreement, and I underline the word default. And I recommend to most people that unfortunately the default agreement is not advantageous to just about any major customer I've ever seen in Australia. This out-of-date operating systems term needs to be, at least for the term of whatever the agreement is, deleted because it's a risk. It's a time bomb. ILMT itself often reads and calculates subcapacity for operating systems which, under the terms and conditions, it is not allowed to do so. An example of this is some of the SUSEs. For instance, SUSE 10, for instance, has been not supported by ILMT for many years, yet most of the current ILMTs will actually calculate subcapacity for it. So IBM's tool says one thing, but IBM's agreement says another thing. Similarly, the case with Flexera, right? Flexera, when you run Flexera, you must comply to the IBM ILMT terms and conditions, no others. And often, if ILMT deletes support for something, Flexera actually continues support, and you are in fact running a non-compliant operating system one way or another. So you have to be careful of this and understand what the rules are, or at the time of negotiation with IBM, rewrite those rules. For instance, if you happen to have Solaris 11 and you're dependent on Solaris 11 and you either and there's a likelihood that this will go out of support because it certainly has and certainly will. You either pay full capacity for that. If it's a small CPU that only has 1 or 2 cores, that's probably not a bad thing. But if it's a large one, I have to try and turn that off one way or another. But if it's a large one, you won't be able to do so.
Okay.
And you need to address that by a change in term and condition.
So with the out-of-date operating systems at the IBM end of life, that's usually different from the end of life that's declared by the publisher. Is that a true statement, Bruce?
Absolutely. Yeah, IBM's position is usually it gives you 180 days afterwards.
Right.
But in reality, it's an absolute, lucky dip. In some cases, it's years afterwards, and in other cases, not at all. Right? So you really have to keep on top of that. And that's part of the job of being an IBM software asset manager, is to be able to have a look at all those moving parts. So many customers that I go to, small ones, You go to and they say, you say you offer your services, and they say, oh no, we've got it in-house, it's all covered. And the truth of that matter is the person who said that has no idea. And the people who, then the people have, they've put in ILMT 5 years ago, they've never read the terms and conditions, it's not updated, and the report they have is complete rubbish. One day, IBM will audit, and the bill will
Sure.
occur. And I can name those customers where this happened, and that bill puts a very bitter taste in people's mouth, and they vow never to use IBM software again because of it. But the truth is that the real reason was the fact that they didn't have a properly qualified software asset manager there. And in many cases, IBM's claim is completely valid.
Right.
Sometimes IBM slips one underneath the radar and changes things without telling people. But many of the other terms have been around for more than a decade. And at that particular point in time, the customer is an educated party and should know. So
Right.
just be careful of the internal person that says that they know, because it is very complex and they usually don't. This often even happens in very large financial institutions with real departments that say they know. But the truth is they don't, and they use other methods to cover up the mistakes.
Sure. Okay, now you mentioned, you made reference to Flexera. Now, one thing that I've always struggled with a little bit are we all know that, within the context of an IBM agreement between a customer and IBM, that they can nominate Flexera as
Yes.
their tool of choice for subcap. What I'm interested to know in more detail, Bruce, is that IBM have some specific terms and conditions that Flexera has to follow to ensure that their tool is compliant. Do you just want to take us through those terms and conditions? And specifically, I think they actually call out versions of ILMT that they need to be compatible with that.
That's
I
right.
may be wrong with that, but I just thought I'd get your view on it, Bruce.
So the first thing to understand is that there's Flexera and Flexera One. Flexera One is the service which IBM resells or whatever, and it's usually kept up to date. And as a service, it's probably one of the only ones on the market for doing that sort of thing. I've not seen too many people use that in this particular area, but Flexera itself is a product that you buy. Certainly tends to be installed in the larger implementations, particularly older implementations. ILMT version 9, which is the product that we're discussing today, really only came about less than 10 years ago. Products bearing the same name before that were not in any way related, and quite a lot of people refer to products, not working or being hard to work about, things like that. And it has nothing to do with the current products at all. Nothing, zero. Not even made by the same people, not a line of code the same. So Flexera, as today, FNMS in-house or whatever, in the enterprise agreement, which IBM doesn't want anyone to read except for the customer, and wants the customer who is not educated to read it, basically says that you can only use Flexera to the point where it absolutely agrees with the current version of ILMT. And you've got 90 days to make that. So what that means is that if ILMT discontinues support of Solaris 12, then Flexera needs to not report that as subcapacity. Now, what you will find is that that is unlikely to be the case. And you will get a Flexera screen indicating something is compliant when it is not. Now, it does happen with ILMT as well sometimes as well. In both cases, either Flexera or ILMT, it is not an automatic system. It still relies on a properly qualified software asset manager to interpret those things and to read the agreements, to read IBM's website, and to see what the tool is telling me, whether it's accurate or not. The problem with all of these tools is that many people in management just want to put a tick in the box. I've installed the tool, I'm okay. Well, the answer is you're not. And you can't eliminate the human being. Simple as that.
Absolutely, Bruce. So just following on from, we were talking about, ILMT, we're talking about outdated operating systems. Just to confirm my understanding that if IBM announces an outdated operating system, that means that the license metric moves from PVU to RVU. Is that correct, Bruce?
No, it moves from subcapacity to full capacity.
Okay. Gotcha.
Now,
Right. Okay.
this can be extraordinarily expensive.
Agreed. Okay.
Now,
So I just thought I'd just make sure that everyone had a common understanding. So if you want to provide some use cases there, Bruce, I think that would help.
well, I mean, the most common one is Windows, right? Is Windows 2012 release 2. Very common out there, right? You're sitting on, say, a 32 core Xeon box, maybe with 2 processors, so it's got 64 cores. You've got a piece of code, maybe WebSphere, that's running on 2 cores. And 1 minute, you've got a license for 2 cores. The next minute, your license is for 64, and you get a bill for 32 cores extra.
Right. Okay.
It's savage.
It is very much so. I couldn't have described that better myself, Bruce. So getting more into the ILMT work now, one of the key aspects of ILMT, from my understanding, is the whole execution of product bundling and product classification. Do you want to talk us through that, Bruce, and how ILMT approaches that? Because I think from my own experience with IBM, that's really sort of like one of the major areas of skill that is required, is to make sure that you've classified the products that Big Fix has discovered correctly. So if you could just explain how that works and the finesse that needs applying in classifying products.
Well, certain products have different metrics. And unfortunately, the software tag which IBM puts into the product doesn't necessarily tell you which metric it's charged for. So, the issue here is if I find a WebSphere, or, well, let's look at another example, say the Connect Direct products. If I find one of them, it could be licensed by core, by PVU. It could be licensed by normal named user. It could be licensed by concurrent user. Now, when a product is discovered, if an automated classification can be made, then ILMT will make it. So for instance, if ILMT finds certain products on a particular server and it knows that those products, when they're found together, would normally come from a certain bundle, it will allocate that particular bundle. But if it finds a product like Connect Direct, it will probably have a default allocation like PVU. But then when you look at your Passport Advantage agreement, you might find that you have some PVU products, but you might have exactly the same product licensed by 3 different metrics. And which is the one that this thing detected? Which was the actual metric? Now, there's no way even AI can tell you the answer to that unless it has all the relevant bits and pieces. And this is where the human aspect comes in there, because you have to have the Passport Advantage, and often you have to have the application owner actually go in there and tell you, I installed this from this license bundle, and therefore this metric applies. So you can only automate that to a certain degree. Now, I do find that various people say Flexera is automated or ILMT is automated, etc., etc., etc. The point is they are all only partially automated. Human intervention is usually required in a complex site. If you've got one product, probably not. If you've got more, probably so, particularly financial institutions. It's mandatory.
Sure, sure. Okay. And is just talking a bit more about, I'm just looking at my notes here. So the actual information that sort of like comes into ILMT, you mentioned that there's different metrics. Is that every single metric that you mentioned 200 before?
Yeah,
Is it?
yeah. So look, the old ILMTs only had a few metrics, right? But the current ones, the catalog's quite vast, and there's probably over 100 of those 200 are actually detected. There's several metrics which you can't detect because some products are charged for by number of people in an organization, or more
Yeah,
particularly the financial turnover and things like that. But ILMT has a lot of metrics nowadays, and it has one of the fields which it keeps is those metrics. When it You can get at every IBM metric through the ILMT APIs, right? The current version of ILMT has a set of APIs which we code to regularly, and even if you've only got Excel, right? If you don't want to use the IBM reports or whatever, you can actually use Excel to extract these things, and you can list every one of those metrics and the quantities in anything you want. So you can actually code external reporting solutions in your graphical tool of choice, if you wish.
sure. Okay, thanks for that. Now, the other items I had on my list before we move into more details about ServiceNow. I was working with a customer last year who was concerned about the IBM acquisition of Web Methods, and they were worried that the license metrics may change from the ones they had with Software AG. Now, this sort of is going to happen every now and again when IBM procure another software company. Typically, Bruce, how do IBM act in those situations when they've bought a software organization and they then become owners of the software?
Well, what
What
IBM
are the
wants to
things to
do,
look out for?
well, I mean, what IBM wants to do is align the terms and conditions with all the existing IBM products, right? And unfortunately, that is often of no consequence, or in some cases of extreme consequence. I mean, it's not just web methods; it's other things. You think you have an agreement with a customer that allows you to have, let's say, this, and this, and an infinite number of users, and suddenly you don't have that anymore, and you've deployed something, and you get a huge bill for it. And web methods is an unfortunate issue because none of the IBM tools actually currently automatically read web methods. And in order to get a proper license position in web methods, it has to be done manually. So first of all, again, you have to detect what VM or container web methods is in. You then have to extract a file which from each of those containers, which actually tells you the type of license which is in there. And then you have to do a manual calculation. Then you have to match it with the IBM terms and conditions, unless you have specified that you do not accept them. And so what I said to customers last year is do not accept any new IBM terms and conditions until exactly we know what that mapping is and whether you're advantaged or disadvantaged. Now we're a year later, and IBM is starting to catch up printing some of these terms and conditions for the particular part numbers. So we're in a better position to know whether we are A, compliant, or B, not compliant. I don't think IBM really does this to make life more difficult, but eventually it wants to bring things in line one way or another. And certain other companies, just don't. For instance, this out-of-date operating systems clause, I don't know of any other company that has that, right?
Right.
Software AG certainly didn't, right?
Mhm.
And, that has a lot to do with it one way or another. Yeah. So
Okay.
unfortunately, you cannot rule out the need for you and I for a very long time to come.
I love it, Bruce. Now, just finally,
Good to
what
know.
are your thoughts on IBM mainframe software these days, Bruce? How should we be approaching that from a software asset management perspective? Because
Well,
I
well,
I believe there's still a lot of mainframe software out there,
oh,
and
well, there's certainly.
sometimes within my discussions, people tend to forget about mainframes when, in fact, the software that's running on there can be notoriously expensive, right?
Well, it is, but the reason they forget about mainframes is because they're still one of the most reliable forms of transaction that you'll ever get, and in a larger scale, one of the cheapest as well, right? The reason that the other reason that people forget is because the SCRT tool, which is used, is often essentially just handed to IBM every month, and they calculate a consumption license, and the customer doesn't look too carefully at what happens in the middle. And that's why the software asset management department often doesn't have visibility of the mainframe. But that is actually a horrible mistake. There are many types of IBM offerings for mainframe. Most of them are not published on the internet and only come out of the kit bag at enterprise license time. And some of those things are more useful for small mainframes because most small mainframes are going away one way or another. And IBM will try to use development licenses that have no charge and various other things to encourage people to stay on these small licenses. So all I encourage people to do is with software asset management, if there's a mainframe involved, not to abdicate that responsibility by just handing the report to IBM, not understanding what it says, and not asking the relevant people at IBM about what offerings are available, because the mainframe people at IBM are some of the nicest, most educated, and most, I'd say, useful people, because their platform is under severe attack, and they will use their kit bag to provide extra, extra um, for the customer to use that sort of thing, and they're usually so much more helpful. So yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
But ILMT, unless it's a Linux mainframe, won't read the data.
Okay. All righty, so we've got about 10 minutes left or so. So what I wanted to do was just to expand on some of the references that Bruce made and what we've talked about today in regards to how we actually manage license compliance for IBM in ServiceNow SAM Pro. So there's a couple of things here that Bruce mentioned about the product classifications about 5 minutes ago. That's important to know because it's that classified product which is ingested into ServiceNow. And obviously I need to take a step back here, that there's an out-of-the-box integration which enables the export of data from ILMT into ServiceNow, and it uses the ILMT version 2 APIs. And the way we actually do that is that data is transmitted through a mid server. We put certificates generated out of ILMT on the mid server, and that provides the permissions for that data to be transmitted. So from a ServiceNow standpoint, we ingest the metrics which are tracked in ILMT. Now, if it's PVU, it also brings in the actual usage data as well. So it'll actually give you that PVU value linked to the product that's in ILMT. So that's at a high level how that integration works. And we've done that integration a number of times, and we've got it pretty fine-tuned in regards to getting that data over, which comes into ServiceNow via a scheduled job. So the data that's brought in is essentially the license metric, if it's PVU, the number of PVUs, etc. And also bring in the information regarding the CI on which the software is installed, and there'll be some verification in ServiceNow around that CI. So essentially what we actually get are the usage information, and that's one side of the coin. Now, the other side of the coin is that we need to reconcile that usage with the software entitlements. And as Bruce said at the very, very start of the call, we get that from the passport agreement. So what we do is get that passport agreement, we analyze it, and we actually create the entitlement records in ServiceNow. Now, an entitlement record involves, the start and end date, whether or not the product is subscription, whether or not it's got maintenance with it, and so on and so forth. So we have that inventory of entitlements. Now, I know from my own experience here that task cannot be understated, especially as Bruce said right at the start of the call, that passport agreements go back, over 25 years. And you really do need to apply some finesse when you're actually going through that agreement and creating entitlement records and determining whether a particular entitlement has maintenance and whether or not it's a subscription and so on and so forth. So there is, a great element of skill in actually doing that, but that's what we do at Asset Sense. So we get the entitlements in, we can then run a reconciliation, and what that reconciliation does, it looks at the usage data that's been pulled in from ILMT and compares that with the entitlement rights that you have on an IBM license, and from that will determine if that license is compliant or non-compliant. Now, Bruce also mentioned that IBM have 200 metrics, and some of those metrics are, what I call the traditional license metrics. Now, when I first started doing software asset management 15 years ago, and excluding IBM, there was only about like 7 or 8 license metrics that we needed to be concerned with. And that's what I mean about the traditional license metrics. So IBM still licensed products by per core, by processor, and that type of thing. And that's where ServiceNow Discovery comes into play, that will actually collect that software installation data. We know how many cores are on the CPU, so we can essentially those license positions are calculated in a straightforward manner. And in that situation, we do not rely on information from ILMT. And Bruce has said this to me a number of times when we've been at customers, that everyone thinks about IBM, everyone thinks about ILMT, PVU, RVU, subcapacity, full capacity. And as Bruce has said to me a number of times, that quite often that's just a drop in the ocean, right? And typically, and I include myself in this, that people forget that there's a whole host of other IBM software that a customer has deployed that doesn't need ILMT. And I find myself sometimes forgetting that. And those are typically handled in the way that other say Microsoft use cases are handled. So that's how we do things in ServiceNow. Data that's in ILMT ingested through an API integration, metrics not in ILMT, but sort of licensed by CPUs, get that from ServiceNow. Other sort of license metrics, as Bruce mentioned, can't be measured. And in that situation, we may need to look at a console, some log files, reports and that. And in that situation, we would just manually enter a number every month, for example, of units that license metric is consumed. So then we can actually have license positions as well for those weird and wonderful metrics that aren't in ILMT. So I think in summary, what I'm saying here is that from a ServiceNow SAM Pro perspective, when we look at IBM, we've got all the use cases covered. And I think that, it's essential for people to know that there's way more than just what's in ILMT. And I know I've worked with Bruce on customers where, basically looking over someone's shoulder and writing a number down, which we then put into ServiceNow to get the right consumption number. Sometimes we have to go down that level because there's just no other way of getting that data. So what me and Bruce are seeing more and more are customers who ask us, how do we do IBM Software Asset Management in ServiceNow? It just sounds to me like it's too difficult. It's in the too hard basket. Yes, it's complex, but if you've actually got the right collection of people, who are focused on getting IBM Software Asset Management into ServiceNow, it's not something that's hard to do. Actually understanding the data and being able to manipulate the data is really the secret of it all. Yeah. And, once we've actually done that, it's essentially a one-time setup. The data will flow from ILMT. We'll get the data from Discovery, and then there's these monthly events, perhaps when we have to go into logs and get data manually. And the key message here is that it's not as hard as people think if you've got the right people involved. And I just find myself getting frustrated that when we're talking about ServiceNow, SAM, organizations will just write off IBM and say, oh, we do it our own way. It's too hard to get it on ServiceNow. We're here to help the people who want to put IBM Software Asset Management onto ServiceNow. And, we've got the resources and skill set to make that happen and, get that particular capability out of the too-hard basket, get it in ServiceNow with all your other SAM use cases, and you've got everything in a single pane of glass. In my view, in 2026, running software asset management in different tools, in different systems, is just not the way forward. It's just not the modern way of doing things. And at that, I'll submit that as my final comment. We've got a few minutes left. Anything to add, Bruce? I think you're on mute.
You're on mute, Bruce.
Yeah, that's true. Other than to underline the last particular point, ILMT has progressed from something that was essentially menu-driven to today, which is something which is highly API-driven. It's kind of possible to actually do the entire function through APIs if you actually wanted to write the code to do so. And those are the APIs which ServiceNow is using to make its extractions one way or another. So ServiceNow by itself may not be IBM compliant, but when you make the connection between the two, and in particular, when you use the APIs to store the snapshot report that comes from ILMT, then IBM can't argue with you as far as compliance is concerned, because contractually in the Passport Advantage Agreement, it says that you have to be able to provide this snapshot every 90 days, and you can do so. So
and
the APIs,
that snapshot is audit ready, right, Bruce, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. It is audit ready, and not only is it audit ready, it can be anonymized. And this is the other most important issue. You shouldn't be telling IBM about or its auditor about your IP addresses and the names of anything. Like in certain countries, that is illegal by government law. So you can anonymize the report, and you can deconstruct the anonymization by a separate file as well. And you can keep that amongst yourself to yourself so that you can read the report. So the ability of these APIs, which have been around now for a couple of years, right, really gives the ability for other platforms to be compliant.
Okay, thanks for that, Bruce. Do you want to wrap up, Mickey, and just
yes. Thank you very much, Bruce and Mike. What a great insight around IBM ILMT licensing. It's such an eye opener for me, especially coming from a ham point of view. But it's really, really good. And yes, hopefully the people that watch this web podcast will find it useful as much as us. Thank you very much. If there's nothing else,
and I think,
then we'll end the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, just one thing, Mickey. If there's any topic that we've discussed today that anyone who's listened into this podcast would like to expand upon, then please contact Mickey, and Mickey will set something up. Or just generically, if there are any other podcasts that any of the listeners would like us to cover around other SAM use cases, obviously on the ServiceNow platform, then again, please reach out to Mickey, and again, we'll look to set something up. But as Mickey said, thanks for listening, and I look forward to future podcasts, and hope you enjoyed it. And like I say, any questions, please reach out.
Thank you all. Thank you, Bruce, Mike. Have a good one.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.